Welcome back to another episode of Harness the Power. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the read-along test feature within PowerSchool Assessment. So let's get started. In order to launch a read-aloud test, you'll need to go to the testing center. You can do that by either clicking on the red Administer an Assessment or coming up to Testing Center in the blue bar up above. Once in the testing center, you may need to click on the school, and then you'll need to choose the subject area that you're working with, as well as the folder that the exam is in that you want to run as a read aloud test. So I'm going to run the 5th grade math example one as a read aloud. Then you'll need to come over on the left hand side menu and click on the teacher name and the class that you want to give the session to. Now, I technically already have a regular PowerTest session running, but if I want to also run a read aloud session of this test, I can either right click on the class and say new test session, or I can come to this menu button and say new test session. Under the session type, I'll need to select PowerTest read along. PowerTest read along. You'll notice once I select it, these selections right underneath here are now grayed out and they're not able to be checked because the PowerTest read-along test sets up the test so it can be read aloud by someone to the students. So you don't want to have random question order, random passage order, or random answer order. You want everything to be the same for the students that are getting this read-along test. So the bad news is that unfortunately there's not a screen reader tool that becomes available when you launch a PowerTest read-along test. Unfortunately, it does mean you are going to need an adult to read aloud the test to students. So you'll want to keep that in mind, especially if you have students who have accommodations where tests need to be read aloud to them. You can still set a download password that will help prevent students from getting in your test prior to the time where you can actually monitor them, or the person who is reading the test aloud to them can actually monitor them. So download passwords are a wonderful thing. So are submit passwords. You can check the box to show students their test scores as soon as they submit. And then the big thing is the box down here at the bottom, add all students to new test session. If you're giving this as a read-along test, more than likely, it's probably just for a few select students that we talked about before where they've got an accommodation and they need exams read aloud to them. So usually, it's probably not going to apply to all students. So I'm going to uncheck that box and say Create New Test Session. Okay. Now, this test session is located down here all the way at the bottom of my screen, so I'm going to collapse this one and expand this one open. What I need to do now is I need to actually add students into the test session. So I need to, since I didn't apply it to all my students, I need to say which students I want this test session to apply to. So I'm going to click on it, and then from there I can choose my students. Another downfall here is I can't select more than one student at a time. So this could be a little bit tedious, if you will, if you've got maybe a large group of students that need the test read aloud to them. But hopefully it only applies to maybe a handful of students. So let me go ahead and add that student in. And interestingly enough, if you were to select a student that's already in a test session for this exact test, meaning like they're in my PowerTest, just the normal PowerTest up here, and I say add a test session, the system's going to recognize that student's already appearing in a test, and it will not let you put them in for the read aloud test or read along test, rather, since they're already existing in a PowerTest session. So that may affect what you're doing here. So if that's the case, I can come back to my PowerTest session, and maybe I forgot that one of my students needs read along, and I accidentally just threw them into my regular PowerTest. That's not a problem. I can just come over and click on the X, and that's going to delete the student from that test session, and then I can go into my read-along test and add that student in. Once I have all my students added that need to have the PowerTest read-along test given to them, remember, you'll have to come up and change the status of the test to green so that it's open for testing and the student can log in. Let me see if I can log in here real quick as this student and show you what the testing environment looks like on a read-along test. Okay, when the student enters into the read-along test, they can click on it and click Next. It's going to load up the test. And then now that I'm here in the testing environment, again, you can see I don't have any sort of screen reader options available to me. I can't even use any extensions in the browser bar because remember, this is a locked window, and should I try to escape, which we talked about before, you'll see I would have access to my extensions here, but it's not reading like I'm in the exam. I'm not in the true testing environment. So unfortunately, that is definitely something that's still lacking in the PowerSchool assessment environment as far as read-along tests go. There's not a screen reader that goes with this. And so that does mean, like I said before, you are going to have a designated person, adult, to actually read these questions aloud while students are taking the test. So this solution may not actually be one that is definitely one you want to take on, and that's definitely up to you. Now, the nice thing that does go along with it is, regardless if you run it as a PowerTest or a PowerTest read-along, students still will be able to use their Chromebook or the desktop computers to log into the testing environment and take the PowerTest. And from that, as the teacher, you still benefit from receiving automatically graded tests, and you get all the reports through the reporting center. And so those types of things make this really convenient. And you do also get the benefit of the secure testing environment. Remember, if you're worried about students actually being honest and not tab browsing or opening up a calculator when they're not supposed to have one, that browser does in fact keep students locked down and in a secure environment to take the test. So there are some benefits to it. It's not perfect, obviously, but hopefully we'll see that come about in a future update. I know for a fact I'll definitely send in some requests and feature requests with PowerSchool assessment and say, why can't we have a screen reader? We need one. It would be so beneficial to have one. That wraps it up for this episode. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next episode. Bye-bye.